Hey everyone, and welcome back to Investing Talk podcast. We're always on the lookout for companies that are doing things differently, and today we're going to zoom in on one that's really shaking things up to the utility sector, NRG Energy, ticker symbol NRG.
Yeah, NRG, they've been on a tear lately.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of unusual, right, to see such strong performance when so many other utility companies are, they're having a tough time.
Yeah, for sure. It's a sector that's been kind of lagging overall.
Exactly. And we're talking about a 72% gain year to date as of October 2024.
Wow, that's impressive.
It is. To put that into perspective, you've got a company like Duke Energy, ticker symbol DUK, which a lot of people consider, like a benchmark for the sector. They haven't even come close. So what is NRG doing that's so different?
Well, one of the things that really jumps out is their approach to debt. NRG has a much lighter debt load than a lot of its competitors.
Huh. So they're not weighed down by all those, financial obligations.
Exactly. It gives them a lot more flexibility to make moves that other companies just can't.
So it's not just about, sitting on their assets and collecting those steady checks. They're actually being proactive with their finances to kind of create those opportunities.
Precisely. And that's evident in their M&A activity, mergers and acquisitions. They've been pretty aggressive about expanding their reach.
So they're not just playing defense. They're going on the offense looking for ways to grow and evolve.
Exactly. And a prime example is their recent acquisition of Vivint Smart Home.
Oh, yeah, I read about that.
So that move really allowed them to tap into this rapidly growing market for smart home energy solutions, which, it pushes them beyond that traditional utility model.
That's a great example. I mean, that's thinking outside the box. Are there any other companies in the sector that are kind of showing this kind of strategic thinking?
Yeah, there are a few that stand out. Constellation Energy, ticker symbol CEG. They're heavily focused on nuclear power.
Oh, interesting.
And they've been able to really capitalize on that growing interest in nuclear as a reliable and, carbon-free energy source.
Yeah, nuclear is definitely having a moment right now, especially with all the concerns about energy security and the need for, cleaner energy sources.
Right. It seems like the companies that are willing to adapt and embrace innovation are the ones that are really pulling ahead.
Okay, so we've established that NRG is, performing really well. But let's zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture. How does NRG's performance stack up against some of those international players?
It's definitely noteworthy, While we do see some strong performers globally, like Electrobras in Brazil, ticker symbol EBR, or Tokyo Gas in Japan, ticker symbol TKGSY, NRG's gains are particularly impressive, especially considering the overall performance of the U.S. utility sector.
All right, so we've painted a pretty rosy picture of NRG so far. But let's get down to what really matters for our listeners. What does all this mean for investors? Should they be rushing out to buy NRG stock?
Well, that's where we need to, inject a little bit of caution.
Okay, so not a slam dunk.
Not necessarily. I mean, NRG's recent performance is definitely compelling. And the fact that they still offer a pretty decent dividend yield, previously noted at 3.72%, that adds to their appeal, especially for income-focused investors.
Yeah, that dividend's a nice little bonus, right? It's like getting a little extra reward for holding on to stock.
Exactly. But, I always like to look at the bigger picture, and there are some risks and challenges associated with NRG strategy that we need to consider.
Okay, so let's talk about those risks. What are some of the things that could potentially derail NRG's success?
One concern is their decision to reduce generation asset ownership while increasing power sales.
So they're kind of shifting their focus.
Right. It's a calculated risk. If power prices continue to climb like they have been, it could really boost their profits.
Right.
But what happens if those prices fall or become more volatile?
Yeah, they could find themselves in a tough spot, right? Having to buy power at a higher price than they could sell it for.
Exactly. And we also can't ignore the overall market conditions. I mean, we're seeing record highs for the S&P 500, but there's still a lot of uncertainty out there.
Yeah, you're right. Inflation, interest rate hikes, potential economic slowdown. I mean, those are all factors that could impact even a company as strong as NRG.
Absolutely. And even though NRG's recent 6.01% gain, significantly outperformed the utility sector, average past performance is never a guarantee of future results.
So what should investors be paying attention to when it comes to evaluating NRG? What are some of the key things they should be looking at?
Well, let's take a look at their recent stock performance through a technical lens. Their stock price has been on a pretty steady upward trajectory, rising from $109.16 to $111.91 in a single day. That's a gain of over 4%. And with trading volume exceeding the average, it suggests that a lot of investors are feeling bullish about NRG right now.
Okay, so that jump in price and the increased volume, that definitely points to some positive momentum. But how sustainable is it? Are we looking at a short-term spike, or is this indicative of a longer-term trend?
That's a great question. If you look at the technical indicators, NRG is currently trading well above its 50-day and 200-day moving averages, which are at $99.3958 and $87.34.69 respectively. This suggests that the stock is in a strong bullish trend. But, and this is crucial, we need to consider other factors as well.
So it's not all sunshine and roses. There are some potential warning signs that investors should be aware of.
Exactly. Take the Relative Strength Index, or RSI, for example. It's a momentum indicator that can help us gauge whether a stock is overbought or oversold. While NRG's RSI is likely in bullish territory, it's important to monitor it closely.
Okay, so it's kind of like a thermometer for investor enthusiasm.
Yeah, exactly. If it climbs too high, it could signal that the stock is becoming overbought, which could potentially lead to a correction.
Okay, so we've got these support and resistance levels at $109.16 and $112.71. What should investors be watching for in terms of NRG stock price movements?
Keep a close eye on those levels. A break above the resistance could signal further upward movement, while a drop below support might indicate a pullback. But remember, technical indicators are just one piece of the puzzle. We need to consider NRG's fundamentals as well.
Right, because at the end of the day, a company's stock performance is driven by its underlying business. So what are some of the key things that investors should be focusing on when it comes to NRG's financials and operations?
Their upcoming earnings report will be crucial. It'll give us more insight into their financial health and whether they can continue to deliver on this impressive performance. Also, it's essential to keep an eye on developments in the broader energy sector, especially regarding renewable energy and government regulations.
It seems like the energy landscape is changing so rapidly these days. Investors really need to stay informed to make the best decisions?
Absolutely. Anything else they should keep in mind when evaluating energy as a potential investment? Yes, the impact of rising interest rates on utilities in general, and any company-specific risks related to NRG's business model should be carefully considered.
So it sounds like while NRG's recent performance has been stellar, investors need to do their due diligence, weigh the potential rewards against the risks, and be prepared for some potential volatility, both in the company's stock price and the broader energy sector. This has been a fascinating discussion, and I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear more.
Indeed, NRG's story is a compelling one, and it really highlights the importance of strategic decision-making in a dynamic industry like energy.
We'll be right back after a quick message, so stay tuned for more insights on NRG Energy. Welcome back to Investing Talk Podcast. We're continuing our look at NRG Energy, a company that's been making waves in the utility sector.
Before the break, we were talking about NRG's impressive performance and, some of the potential risks and rewards associated with their strategy.
Right, we talked about their, low debt, their aggressive approach to mergers and acquisitions, and that interesting decision to reduce their ownership of power plants while actually increasing their power sales. But you mentioned some company-specific risks. So what are some of the things that could potentially throw a wrench in NRG's plans?
Well, one thing to keep in mind is their reliance on those wholesale power markets.
Okay.
It's kind of a double-edged sword. When prices are high like they've been recently, NRG can really capitalize on that and generate some strong profits.
Right.
However, if those prices drop or become more volatile, their margins could shrink, and that would definitely impact their bottom line.
So it's a little bit of a gamble then. They're betting that they can consistently buy power at a lower price than they can sell it for.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it. What are some other potential risks? Well, the regulatory landscape is always something to consider.
Of course.
The energy sector is heavily regulated, and any changes in government policies or regulations could have a big impact on NRG's business.
Makes sense. So what kind of changes are we talking about?
Well, for example, a greater emphasis on renewable energy could create some challenges for their existing power generation assets.
Oh, right. Because they still have some of those traditional power plants.
They do, and while they've been investing in renewable energy projects, a rapid shift in regulations could disrupt their plans and potentially affect their profitability.
Got it. So they need to be adaptable.
Absolutely. And then there's competition.
Right, of course.
The energy market is getting more and more competitive with new players emerging and existing players, trying to adapt. NRG needs to stay ahead of the curve if they want to maintain their market share and keep growing.
So even though they're doing well now, they can't just sit back and relax?
Exactly. They need to keep innovating, finding ways to stand out from the crowd.
Okay, so it sounds like investors need to really weigh these potential risks against the potential rewards when they're considering NRG as an investment.
Absolutely. And let's not forget about the impact of rising interest rates.
Oh, right. We touched on that earlier.
Utilities typically carry a lot of debt to finance their infrastructure projects.
Yeah, those big power lines and power plants don't come cheap.
Right. So when interest rates go up, their borrowing costs increase, and that can put a squeeze on their profits.
And that could make their stock less attractive to investors who are looking for growth and income.
Exactly. So it's a complex picture with a lot of moving parts. Investors need to stay informed and be prepared for some potential volatility.
No doubt. So where can investors go to get the information they need to make informed decisions about NRG?
Well, they should definitely start by digging into the company's financial statements.
Okay.
Look at their balance sheet, income statement, cash flow statement. Those are all key documents that provide a snapshot of their financial health.
Right. And those statements can be found on the company's website, usually in the investor relations section.
Exactly. And pay attention to the regulatory environment.
Okay.
Keep up with any changes in government policies or regulations that could affect the energy sector.
Good point, because those changes can happen quickly and have a big impact.
Exactly. And don't forget about competition.
Right, we talked about that.
Investors need to understand who NRG is competing with and how they stack up. Are they offering something unique? Are they investing in new technologies to stay ahead?
It's all about understanding the big picture.
Exactly. And I think the most important thing for investors to remember is that investing in the energy sector, especially a company like NRG that's going through such a transformation, is a long-term game.
It's not a get-rich-quick scheme.
No, it requires patience and a willingness to ride out the inevitable ups and downs.
So let's bring it back to our listeners. What are some key takeaways they can use when they're evaluating NRG or any other company in the energy sector? What are some of the essential things they should be looking at?
Well, first and foremost, they need to understand the business model.
Okay, so how does the company make money?
Exactly. What are their core operations? Who are their main customers? What are their sources of revenue?
Got it. So it's all about knowing what you're buying into.
Precisely. And then they need to assess the financial health of the company.
Okay, we talked about the financial statements earlier.
Right. Are they profitable? Are they managing their debt effectively? Are they generating enough cash flow to support their operations and future growth?
Because at the end of the day, a company's financial performance is going to drive its stock price.
Exactly. And don't forget about the regulatory environment.
Right, we talked about that too.
How could changes in government policies or regulations impact the company's business? Are they positioned to adapt to those changes?
So it's not just about looking at the company in isolation. You have to consider the broader context.
Precisely. And then finally, think about the competitive landscape.
Right.
Who are the company's main competitors? How are they differentiating themselves? Are they investing in innovation to stay ahead of the curve?
It's all about understanding the industry dynamics and how the company fits within that broader context.
Exactly. And any final thoughts? Just remember that investing in the energy sector, especially a company like NRG, is a long-term game. It's important to stay informed, do your research, and be prepared for both the opportunities and the challenges that lie ahead.
Well said. NRG's story is a fascinating one, and it really provides a great example for anyone who's interested in understanding the complexities and the opportunities within the energy sector. And for those of you who are thinking about adding NRG to your portfolio, remember, knowledge is power. The more you understand about the company, the industry, the broader market forces at play, the better equipped you'll be to make those informed investment decisions.
Couldn't agree more. Stay curious, stay informed, and as always, diversify your investments.
That's great advice. And on that note, we'd like to remind you to subscribe to Investing Talk Podcast, share this episode with your friends and fellow investors, and leave us a comment with your thoughts on NRG Energy. We're always eager to hear from our listeners. Thanks for tuning in. It's really interesting how NRG is kind of changing what people think of when they think about a utility company. They're not just sitting back and, just doing the same old thing. They're really looking for new opportunities and trying to keep up with all the changes happening in the energy world.
Yeah, it's a very different approach, and it seems to be working well for them. Their willingness to try new things, whether it's through those acquisitions or investments in renewable energy, it's setting them apart from a lot of their competitors.
Yeah, it's like they're thinking ahead, like a chess player while everyone else is playing checkers. They're anticipating what's coming next and trying to be ready for the future. But, we can't forget about those investors who are really drawn to NRG's dividend. Even with the stock price doing so well, they're still offering a pretty solid yield.
It's right. And we know from earlier that the dividend yield was around 3.72%, which is pretty attractive, especially for investors who are focused on income or those who are looking to diversify their portfolio and get a little bit of that reliable income stream.
Yeah, I can see why that would be appealing. It's like a little extra on top of any potential gains from the stock price. But I think it's important to remember that dividends aren't guaranteed. A company's financial health and its ability to keep paying those dividends over time are things that investors should really think about.
Oh, absolutely. Investors need to look beyond just the dividend yield and really assess the company's overall financial strength. Are they making enough money to cover those dividend payments? Are their earnings increasing? Are they managing their debt well? Those are all critical questions.
Right? Because if a company cuts its dividend, that could be a bad sign and it could hurt the stock price. So while the dividend is definitely a nice bonus, it's important to think about it in the context of the company's overall performance and their long-term outlook. Any other final thoughts for our listeners as they think about energy or any other investment in the energy sector, which seems to be changing all the time?
I think the biggest takeaway is that knowledge is power. The more you know about a company, its industry, the competition, and what's happening in the economy, the better decisions you'll be able to make. Don't be afraid to ask questions, do your research, and get different perspectives.
Well said. And remember, investing is a marathon, not a sprint. It's all about learning, adapting, and making choices that align with your goals and how much risk you're comfortable with. We hope that taking a closer look at NRG Energy today has given you some valuable insights and maybe sparked your interest in the world of energy investing.
It's been great sharing our thoughts with you today. We encourage you to stay engaged, keep learning, and as always, invest wisely.
Thanks for joining us on Investing Talk Podcast. We really appreciate you listening. Don't forget to subscribe, share this episode with anyone who might find it useful, and leave us a comment with your thoughts on NRG Energy. We always love hearing from our listeners. Until next time, happy investing.